She thought her best friend had everything. The house, the husband, the life. And for years, she smiled at her friends' wedding photos, sat across from her at dinner tables in restaurants she could barely afford, and whispered to herself in the dark of her apartment, "That should have been me." So she stopped waiting. She stopped watching from the sidelines. She made a move. She got exactly what she wanted. And the moment she stepped inside that life, the moment the door closed behind her, she finally understood the secret her best friend had been carrying alone, in silence, behind every beautiful picture she had ever posted online. This is the story of two women, one who survived something no one knew about, and one who walked straight into it, with her eyes wide open, believing she was walking into a dream. By the time you finish this story, you will never look at someone else's life the same way again. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming Fireside Tales videos. Her name was Renee, and the first thing you need to know about Renee is that she never asked for much. She grew up in a working-class neighborhood on the south side of Atlanta, Georgia, where the streets smelled like barbecue on Sunday afternoons and the sound of neighbors calling to each other across chain-link fences was as familiar as breathing. It was the kind of place where everybody knew your name before you introduced yourself, where children rode bikes until the streetlights came on and families left their front doors open on warm evenings, because there was nothing to hide and no reason to be a stranger. Renee was the quiet one on the block. She moved through life with a careful deliberateness, the way people do when they have learned early that stillness is its own kind of strength. She helped her mother at the church bake sales every third Saturday. She read library books with cracked spines that she renewed 3 times before finally returning. She kept a small gratitude journal on her nightstand, a habit she picked up from her grandmother in Savannah, who always said that a thankful heart draws good things to itself. She was not the kind of girl who walked into a room and turned every head, but she was the kind of girl you trusted with your real secrets. Her best friend was named Simone. Simone was something else entirely. She was the girl who could walk into a room and immediately change the temperature of it. Bold, magnetic, impossible to ignore. She had this laugh, loud and genuine and completely unapologetic, that started somewhere deep and filled every corner of whatever space she occupied. When she focused her eyes on you, you felt like the most fascinating person alive. She wanted things loudly and without apology. Nice clothes, a beautiful home in a neighborhood where the houses had 2-car garages and manicured lawns. A husband who could provide the life she had seen on television and in the glossy magazines she collected and kept in neat stacks under her bed. She had grown up watching that kind of life from the outside, pressing her nose against the glass of it, and she had decided early and firmly that she was going to find her way in. Growing up, Simone would scroll through luxury home listings on her phone and point out living rooms with hardwood floors and granite countertops and tall windows that looked out over perfectly kept backyards. "That is where I am ending up one day," she would say, with the absolute certainty of someone who had already decided. "I am not staying on this side of town forever, Renee. I promise you that." Renee would smile and say, "I just want to be happy, whatever that looks like." Simone would roll her eyes affectionately. "Happiness is better with a nice house, baby." But that was the thing about them. Their differences never pulled them apart. If anything, those very differences were the thread that held them together so tightly for so many years. Simone pulled Renee into the world when Renee wanted to retreat from it. Renee steadied Simone when Simone was about to go too far. They balanced each other the way that only people who have known each other since childhood really can. Through high school and then Howard University in Washington, D.C., through heartbreaks and financial stress and the 1,000 overwhelming difficulties of becoming an adult in a world that did not make it easy, they remained each other's constant. "We are going to be in each other's lives forever," Simone said one night during their junior year, lying across Renee's dorm bed with a bowl of popcorn between them. "No matter what happens, no matter who we marry or where we end up, you and me, that part never changes." Renee believed her completely. She had absolutely no reason not to. After graduation, life carried them in slightly different directions, the way it inevitably does. Renee moved back to Atlanta and started a small catering business out of her mother's kitchen. She had always been an extraordinary cook, the kind of person who could take humble ingredients and transform them into something that made people close their eyes on the first bite. She started small. Birthday parties, baby showers, church luncheons. She packed her food into aluminum trays, loaded them into her aging Honda CR-V, and drove across Atlanta before sunrise to set up folding tables and chafing dishes in church fellowship halls and community centers. It was exhausting work. It was also entirely hers, and she was proud of it. It was at a corporate retirement dinner at the Lowe's Atlanta Hotel, an event she had been hired to cater through a referral from her cousin, that she met David. He did not announce himself. That was the first thing she noticed about him. He was the kind of man who did not need to. He stood near the far side of the ballroom, dressed impeccably in a dark navy suit, holding a glass of sparkling water instead of the champagne that everyone else was reaching for, watching the room with the composed attention of someone who had learned long ago that the most powerful position in any room is the quiet one. He came back for a second plate of her smothered chicken and cornbread, then a third. "I do not usually eat this much at these things," he said, setting his plate down and looking at her directly. "But whoever is responsible for this food deserves to know it is the best meal I have had at an event in a very long time." Renee laughed, caught off guard. "That would be me." He smiled for the first time. "Then I came to exactly the right person." His name was David Hargrove. He was 43, never married, a real estate developer with properties across Atlanta, Buckhead, and Alpharetta. But he did not lead with any of that. He asked about her business. He asked how she learned to cook. He asked about the seasoning she used in the smothered chicken gravy and listened to her answer the way people listen when they are actually interested, not just waiting for their turn to speak. He got her number before the evening ended. He called the next morning at 9 o'clock. He was consistent in the quiet, unshowy way that mature men sometimes are. He showed up when he said he would. He remembered the small details she mentioned in passing. 1 week into their getting to know each other, she mentioned offhandedly that her commercial mixer had broken down, and she had a large order coming up that weekend. She said it once, almost as an aside. For days later, a brand new professional KitchenAid stand mixer was delivered to her mother's house with a handwritten card that read, "For the woman who makes the best smothered chicken in Atlanta. No more worrying about the weekend." Renee sat down on her mother's kitchen floor and pressed the card against her chest. Not because of the mixer, because of the card, because of being seen by someone who was actually paying attention. She introduced David to Simone 8 weeks into the relationship. Simone had driven down from Charlotte, where she was working in pharmaceutical sales, specifically for the introduction. She arrived at the restaurant in Buckhead looking stunning. A structured burgundy wrap dress, heels, hair freshly done. The way she always dressed when first impressions were on the line. She shook David's hand warmly and laughed at exactly the right moments through dinner and asked him smart questions about his work. But Renee caught something in Simone's eyes during the meal. A flicker. The way Simone's gaze moved around the restaurant, taking in the type of place David had chosen, the way the host had greeted him by name, the quiet ease with which he handled everything, and processed all of it. It was not envy. Not yet. At that point, it was just noticing. "Girl," Simone said to Renee while David was handling the check. "He is the real thing. Please do not mess this up." Renee laughed. "I am doing my best." "Do better than your best," Simone said, and she was smiling when she said it. But there was something underneath that smile that Renee would not understand until much later. David proposed 16 months later. He did not hire a photographer or rent out a rooftop restaurant. He did it on an ordinary Sunday morning in Renee's apartment in Decatur, while she was still in her robe at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the morning news playing quietly in the background. He walked in from the living room, sat down across from her, placed a small velvet box on the table between their coffee cups, and said, "I have spent my whole adult life looking for a person I can be at peace with. I found her sitting right here. I would like to spend the rest of my life being at peace with you." Renee looked at the box. Then she looked at him. "Yes," she said. "Yes. Obviously yes." They married 6 months later at a small estate venue in Roswell, Georgia. 130 guests. Soft white and sage green florals everywhere. A ceremony in the garden at golden hour. the Georgia light falling through the tall oaks in warm amber columns. Renee wore a simple, breathtaking ivory gown with delicate pearl detailing at the neckline. A gown she and her mother had found at a bridal boutique in Midtown after trying on 22 others. Simone stood beside her as maid of honor. She gave a toast that brought the entire room to tears. She talked about the little girl she had met on the south side of Atlanta decades ago. She talked about library books and late-night phone calls and the friend who had always believed that quiet, steady love was worth waiting for. She raised her glass and said, "Renee, you deserve absolutely everything that is about to happen to you. I mean that from every part of my heart." Every person in that room believed her. Renee believed her most of all. After the wedding, Renee moved into David's home, a stunning 4-bedroom craftsman-style house in Buckhead, Atlanta, with a wraparound front porch, high ceilings, original hardwood floors throughout, and a backyard that looked like something from a Southern Living magazine spread. There was a reading nook built into the wall of the upstairs hallway, lined with bookshelves on both sides, with a cushioned window seat that looked out over the backyard garden. Renee claimed it as her favorite place in the world within the first week. When Simone came to visit for the first time, she pulled into the driveway and sat in her car for a full minute before getting out. She stood on the front porch and looked at the house. Then she looked at Renee. "Renee," she said finally. "Just her name. Nothing else." "I know," Renee said, smiling. "No." Simone shook her head slowly. "You cannot know how this looks from where I am standing." They walked through every room. Renee showed her the kitchen with its farmhouse sink and subway tile backsplash, the primary suite with its spa bathroom, the reading nook, the back porch overlooking the garden with its string lights and stone fire pit. And Simone followed quietly, taking in everything. She ran her hand along the kitchen counter. She stood at the back door for a long time, looking at the garden. "You are so lucky," she said at last. She hugged Renee then, and the hug was genuine and warm and real. But when Simone drove back to her apartment in Charlotte that evening and sat alone in her living room, the landlord who never fixed the heat, the boyfriend Kevin who was charming in all the wrong ways and reliable in none of the right ones, the credit card debt that never seemed to shrink, something shifted quietly inside her. Just a whisper. She does not even realize what she has. What Simone did not know, what no one knew, was that Renee's marriage was not what it appeared to be. Not even remotely. David Hargrove, behind the craftsman doors and the wraparound porch and the beautifully curated life, was a fundamentally different man than the one who charmed rooms and made thoughtful gestures and listened like he cared. At home, in private, he was volatile, controlling, possessed of a specific kind of rage that powerful men sometimes carry beneath their composure, the kind that surfaces when they feel their control slipping, even slightly, even over something completely inconsequential. Started small, the way these things always do. He did not like Renee answering her phone during dinner. He felt it was a sign of disrespect. He did not like that she continued taking catering clients after they married. He said it suggested to people that he was not providing adequately. He did not like her spending long hours on the phone with her mother or Simone. He wanted to know exactly where she was going and exactly when she would return every time she left the house. Renee adjusted. She reorganized her habits. She modified her behavior. She told herself this was what compromise looked like in a real adult relationship. She told herself that a man who cared this much simply loved deeply. Every time she thought she had found the right shape to fit into, the shape shifted. The first time he hit her, she was on the phone with her younger sister. Her sister had called during dinner. She rarely called without a real reason, and Renee was worried. So Renee had answered. David's face changed before she could register what was happening. His hand connected with the side of her face, and the sound of it was so startlingly loud in the quiet kitchen that her first thought, absurdly, was that something had fallen off the counter. The silence after was worse than the sound. He left the table and went upstairs without a word. Renee sat alone at the dinner table in her beautiful kitchen in her beautiful house with her food going cold in front of her, her cheek burning, completely unable to organize what had just happened into any framework that made sense. She sat there for a very long time. The next morning he brought her coffee and a single white peony, her favorite flower, and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her with those calm, even eyes and said, I am sorry. I let my frustration get the better of me. You know how much I love you. I will do better. And Renee, who had loved the idea of this man and this life and was terrified of what it would mean to name what had just happened, looked at the peony in his hand and nodded. Okay, she said. That was the beginning. Over the following months, Renee became an expert at managing the information her life produced. Long-sleeved cardigans on warm Georgia days. Concealer that her Instagram followers assumed was simply her exploring a new beauty routine. Carefully chosen angles for photographs. Captions that were warm and vague and told nothing. She became fluent in the language of concealment because the alternative, saying it out loud, dismantling the life that everyone admired, watching Simone's face shift from envy into pity, felt impossible. She could not say the words, so she said nothing. And Simone, in Charlotte, scrolled through Renee's Instagram on Saturday evenings and saw a woman living a life worth wanting. The back porch with the string lights, the kitchen with fresh flowers on the counter. David's arm around Renee's shoulders at a charity gala in Midtown, both of them smiling for the camera. She doesn't even know how blessed she is, Simone would think to herself. And the whisper grew louder. Simone's life was not falling apart. That matters to say clearly. She had a good job in pharmaceutical sales that paid well and came with a company car. She had friends in Charlotte who loved her. She had a boyfriend named Kevin who was handsome and funny and completely unreliable. Full of plans that never materialized, borrowed money that was never repaid, promises that evaporated in the specific way that charming but aimless men's promises tend to. She was not suffering. She was not desperate. But she was hungry in a particular way. She had always believed she was meant for more than what she had. She had always carried a bone-deep certainty that she was destined for the kind of life she had spent her childhood admiring from the outside. And watching Renee, quiet, unassuming, never the loudest person in the room, living inside the exact life Simone had always pictured for herself, triggered something that she genuinely could not control. She began driving down to Atlanta more often. She told herself she was being a good friend, staying connected, showing up. But the truth was that she came inside the house, to feel the wide hardwood floors under her feet, to sit on that back porch with a glass of sweet tea and watch the Georgia sunset over the garden, to observe David, the way he moved through his own space, the way he handled things, the quiet authority he carried so effortlessly. She started paying closer attention to him. She noticed that he refilled her glass before Renee's at dinner. She noticed that he lingered in conversations with her slightly longer than necessary. She built an entire alternate story in her mind, brick by careful brick, in which David was not truly happy, in which Renee did not fully appreciate what she had, in which Simone herself was the woman who had always been meant to stand in that kitchen and sleep in that primary suite and sit on that back porch. Hunger, when it goes unaddressed long enough, begins to make its own decisions. She broke up with Kevin. She started dressing intentionally every time she came to Atlanta. Fitted dresses, careful makeup, a perfume that lingered after she left. She found reasons to touch David's arm when she laughed. She praised him constantly and openly. She sent him a birthday text that was warmer than appropriate and told herself it was just being friendly. David noticed. Renee noticed. Neither of them said anything directly, but the air in the house had changed. A new tension had entered the rooms, and Renee, who was already walking on ice inside her own marriage every single day, felt the ground becoming even more unstable beneath her feet. Simone had a coworker named Brenda who believed in certain things that Simone had always privately dismissed. Old practices, spiritual interventions, the kind of solutions whispered about in certain families across the American South for generations. Things discussed in hushed voices after Sunday service or in the back rooms of beauty supply stores, never in polite public conversation. Simone had always rolled her eyes at these conversations, until one Thursday evening in her Charlotte apartment, sitting alone with a glass of Pinot Grigio and Renee's latest Instagram post glowing on her phone screen. David and Renee at a rooftop dinner in Midtown Atlanta, his hand on the small of her back, both of them laughing at something. Simone picked up the phone and called Brenda. That woman you mentioned once, Simone said carefully. The one out past Lithonia. Tell me more. There was a long pause on the line. Simone, Brenda said. Are you sure about this? Just tell me, Simone said. The address came reluctantly, after a second phone call the following day. Simone drove down to Atlanta that weekend and told Renee she was just coming to visit. She spent Friday night at the house. Saturday morning, while Renee was at the farmer's market and David was at a property showing, Simone told the housekeeper she was going to run errands and drove 40 minutes east of Atlanta toward a small unincorporated community past Lithonia, Georgia. The road narrowed the further she drove. Pine trees lined both sides and the GPS signal flickered. The property, when she finally found it, was set back from the road behind a rusted gate and a gravel path. A modest cinder block structure. A front porch with wind chimes and dried herbs hung in bundles from the ceiling. The woman who answered the door was older, small, with silver locks and eyes that assessed Simone completely in a single glance. She did not ask her name. Come in, she said. Simone sat in a dim front room that smelled of cedar and something sweet and smoky she could not identify. The woman sat across from her in a straight-backed wooden chair. What have you come for? She asked. Simone opened her mouth, then closed it. Sitting here in this room in front of this person, the thing she wanted to say suddenly sounded like madness. She looked at her hands. There is a man, she started. The woman nodded slowly. He belongs to someone else. My best friend. Another nod. I want him to choose me. The woman was quiet for what felt like a very long time. The wind chimes outside stirred. When she finally spoke, her voice was unhurried and completely without drama. What I can do will bind you to him. Not just his affection, everything he is, his anger, his habits, his history. Whatever he carries, you will carry too. And once it is done, there is no reversal. You cannot change your mind later. You will be tied to this man for the rest of your natural life, no matter what that life becomes. The room felt very still. Simone heard the words. She understood them on the surface level. And then she thought about the back porch with the string lights, the reading nook with the bookshelves, the primary suite with the spa bathroom, sleeping in a bed where she felt chosen, walking through a life that people admired. I understand, she said. I accept. She did not fully understand what she was accepting. The ritual was brief and unremarkable from the outside. When it was over, Simone drove back toward Atlanta in the late afternoon Georgia sun with all 4 windows down. She felt something she could only describe as certainty. She had made her move. The waiting was finished. She did not sleep that night. She lay in the guest bedroom of Renee's house, the house she was going to have, and stared at the ceiling and felt, for the first and last time, that she had taken control of her own destiny. She had no idea what she had actually taken control of. 3 weeks later, David asked Renee to leave. He came home on a Tuesday evening and sat across from her in the living room with a stillness about him that was qualitatively different from his usual controlled calm. He folded his hands on his knees and said, without any discernible emotion, I need this marriage to end. I want you to make arrangements to move out. Renee stared at him. What? I will have my attorney reach out about the paperwork, he said. I need you gone by the end of the month. He stood up and walked out of the room. Renee sat in the living room of the house she had loved and made into a home for 2 years. She looked at the bookshelves. She looked at the flowers she had arranged on the mantel that morning. She looked at the staircase leading up to the reading nook, her favorite place in the world. She waited to feel the full devastation of it. And underneath the shock, underneath the disbelief, buried beneath all of it like something precious she had almost forgotten was there, she felt a small, quiet, terrifying thing. Relief. She packed with her sister Camille, who drove up from Macon without being asked when Renee finally called her. They loaded boxes and suitcases into Camille's SUV with focused efficiency, not talking much, and Renee took what was hers and left what was not. They drove south on I-75 toward Macon as the sun went down over the Atlanta skyline. Renee looked out the passenger window the whole way. She did not post anything online. She did not call anyone except Camille. She did not explain to anyone what had happened. She simply stepped out of the life and let the door close behind her. Simone found out 4 days later, from a mutual friend who mentioned it not knowing its significance. Simone's hands went completely still when she heard it. She sat with the information for a full 2 minutes. And she was horrified, genuinely horrified at herself, to discover that her first feeling was not guilt. It was anticipation. She waited exactly 1 week. Then she called David. He answered on the second ring. His voice was flat, businesslike, not warm, not the voice of a man who had been waiting for her call. "Come down," he said simply. Something about the tone of it made the back of her neck prickle. But she ignored it. She told herself it was just his manner. She drove to Atlanta that Friday. She wore her best dress. She stood on the front porch of the house she had been dreaming about and rang the doorbell. When the door opened and she stepped inside, the house felt different. Not in any way she could have articulated. Just different. The air felt denser. The familiar rooms felt slightly wrong from this angle, the way a beloved photograph looks when you realize you are now standing on the other side of the camera. "I always knew you understood me better than most people," David said casually, not quite looking at her. Simone's chest filled with a triumph she could not contain. She had no idea she was walking into the same storm she had just helped someone else escape. They were together officially within 10 days. Things moved with a speed that felt less like romance and more like a current pulling her forward. David said she should stay. He said they should make it formal. He said there was no reason to delay. Simone said yes to everything. She moved her belongings down from Charlotte in a rented van on a Sunday. She hung her clothes in the same closet she had admired during visits. She slept in the primary suite. She walked across those hardwood floors in the early morning light barefoot, the way she had always imagined doing. She told herself she was happy. She worked very hard at believing it. But something was wrong from the very first night. Not one large identifiable thing. Something diffuse, atmospheric. Like the feeling you get in a house when you realize the sounds it makes are different from what you expected. The back porch with the string lights, the one she had sat on so many evenings and imagined as her own, felt different when you were the only one sitting on it. Larger, quieter, more isolated. And David was different. The first incident happened on the 5th day. She had used his phone charger from the kitchen counter because hers was packed somewhere she had not found yet. A completely ordinary thing. He walked into the kitchen and saw it plugged into the wall, her phone charging beside his coffee maker. The change in his face was instantaneous. "Did I say you could use that?" Simone looked up. "Mine is packed somewhere. I just needed... Did I give you permission to use my things?" His voice had not risen a single degree. It was perfectly level and completely controlled. That was the part that sent cold through her. The control. "No," she said quietly. "I am sorry." He unplugged the charger, took it, and left the room. Simone sat at the kitchen island for a long time afterward with her phone dark in her hand, looking at the space on the counter where the charger had been. She told herself it was early days. She told herself adjustment took time. She told herself she was being sensitive. She told herself these things until the first time he hit her. That was day 11. She had asked where he was going. He had put his jacket on at 8:30 on a Tuesday night without a word of explanation, and his response came before she had finished the sentence. She found herself against the wall of the bedroom hallway with her ears ringing, more stunned than anything else, trying to understand what had just happened. He straightened his jacket. He left. He came back after midnight. He slept beside her without speaking. He was asleep within minutes. Simone lay in the dark in the primary suite of the house she had fought to be inside, staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly overhead, her heart pounding so hard she felt it in her jaw. This was not the dream. This was something that did not have a clean name yet. The weeks that followed were an education she had never asked for. Simone learned that David's anger had no reliable trigger. It was not tied to specific behaviors she could identify and modify. Could be the wrong tone of voice, a look he misread, a phone call from a friend he did not recognize, being in the kitchen when he wanted silence, being too quiet when he wanted engagement. There was no formula. There was no safe mode of being. There was only the relentless low-grade exhaustion of living in a constant state of vigilance, waiting, always waiting, for the next shift in his mood. She learned that the housekeeper and the landscaper moved through the property with a particular kind of careful efficiency she now recognized as the practiced invisibility of people who had learned to be unnoticeable around unpredictable power. When their eyes met hers, they held a sympathy that she could not bear and could not look away from. She learned that the beautiful back porch and the reading nook and the hardwood floors were not comfort. They were scenery. She tried to leave on a Monday afternoon. She packed a small overnight bag while David was at a meeting in Alpharetta. She had her car keys. She had her phone. She had a plan. Drive to her sister's place in Smyrna and figure out the rest from there. She walked through the house and out the front door. She crossed the front porch. She went down the porch steps. She walked to the end of the front path. She reached for the gate latch. The pain started in her chest so suddenly and so severely that she doubled forward. Not emotional pain, physical pain. A crushing, squeezing sensation directly behind her sternum. Her vision went white at the edges. Her knees buckled. She grabbed the gate post with both hands and held on, gasping, unable to move forward, unable to breathe. And when her body turned back toward the house, the pain released so completely and so instantly that she stood there shaking in the Georgia heat, her overnight bag on the ground beside her feet, completely unable to explain what had just happened. She stood at that gate for a long time. Then she picked up her bag. She walked back inside. She put the bag in the closet. The old woman's words settled over her then with the weight of something irreversible. Whatever he carries, you carry too. You cannot change your mind. Simone sat on the edge of the bed she had dreamed of sleeping in, and for the first time since she had driven past Lithonia on that Saturday morning, she let herself think about Renee. Not as competition. Not as someone who had been standing between Simone and what she deserved. As a person. As a woman who had lived in this house and worn cardigans in Georgia summer heat and smiled in photographs taken in this very room and never told the truth to anyone who loved her. Renee had not been lucky. Renee had been enduring. And Simone had looked at that endurance from the outside, through the curated filter of social media and carefully managed visits, and called it a blessing she deserved more than Renee did. The tears that came then were the first truly honest tears she had cried in a very long time. Renee had moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Decatur, Georgia. It was a 12-minute drive from the house in Buckhead and approximately 1,000 miles away from everything that house had been. The apartment was modest and clean. Second floor, a small kitchen, a window above the sink that looked out over a quiet street lined with crepe myrtle trees. She had furnished it slowly and intentionally. A comfortable sofa, a bookshelf, a good lamp for the reading corner she had made by the window. She bought herself a small succulent plant for the kitchen windowsill. She put her grandmother's quilt on the bed. The first morning she woke up there, she lay still and listened. No footsteps tracking movement in another part of the house. No doors opening in a way that required immediate interpretation. No sounds that demanded calculation. Just the ordinary music of a building waking up. Water moving through pipes. A car passing outside. A mockingbird somewhere in the crepe myrtle trees. She got up and made coffee and sat by the window and breathed. Long, full, unguarded breaths. She noticed, with a kind of quiet astonishment, that she had not breathed like this in over 2 years. She went back to work. She called every client she had stepped back from during the marriage. She took every job that came. Birthday parties, office luncheons, a retirement celebration for a woman in Stone Mountain who had worked the same job for 31 years and wanted good Southern food and no fuss. Renee showed up with her equipment and her coolers, and she cooked with everything she had, and she came home tired in the good way that tired feels when it belongs to you. She started sleeping through the night. Colors looked brighter. Food tasted more like itself. She noticed the way the light changed on Decatur streets in the late afternoon, going gold and then pink before the sun went down behind the apartments across the road. She did not post anything on social media for almost 2 months. Then one quiet Sunday she photographed her own hands holding a cast iron skillet on her modest stove, steam rising from a pan of cornbread. She wrote under it, "Back to what I know. Back to what I love." Within hours the comments filled with women who recognized something in the image that they could not have named precisely but felt completely. Renee read every single comment. She felt, For the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, entirely like herself. Simone's text arrived on a rainy Wednesday evening in November. Renee was at her kitchen table going over an invoice for a holiday catering order when her phone lit up. "I need to talk to you, please." Renee set her pen down. She read the message 3 times. She knew Simone's voice well enough to hear what those 5 words were costing her. Please especially. Simone did not use that word casually. She did not ask easily. She did not reach out like this unless she was out of options. Renee sat with the message for a long time. Then she typed back, "Come Saturday. 10 o'clock. Simone arrived at the Decatur apartment just after 10 on a gray November morning. She was wearing a coat that was too thin for the weather. Her hair was pulled back simply, without its usual careful styling. She had done her makeup carefully but not carefully enough. The bruising along her cheekbone was visible in the November light. Renee opened the door and looked at her. She stepped aside without a word. Simone came in. She looked around the small apartment, the modest sofa, the bookshelf, the good lamp in the corner, the succulent on the kitchen windowsill, the grandmother's quilt visible through the bedroom doorway. The apartment that had nothing grand about it and somehow held everything that mattered. Then she looked at Renee, and she told her everything. She started with the envy. She traced it back to its origin, to the first evening she had walked through the house in Buckhead and felt the ground shift under her feet. She described the months of comparison, the nightly scrolling, the intentional dressing and the calculated visits. She told her about driving east past Lithonia on that Saturday morning and what had happened in that cinder block house with the wind chimes and exactly what words she had said and what words had been said back to her. She told her about the pain at the gate. She told her about the night David had struck her in the bedroom hallway at 8:30 on a Tuesday and gone out without another word and come home after midnight and slept without apology. She told her about going back to find the old woman and being told there was no reversal. When she finished, the apartment was very quiet. The rain had slowed outside. Water dripped from the roof edge past the window. Somewhere down the street, a car door closed. Renee did not speak immediately. She sat with what she had heard. She looked at her oldest friend. At the bruise the November light made impossible to ignore. At the hands folded in her lap gripping each other tightly. At the eyes that were red-rimmed and exhausted and stripped of every layer of performance. Then she said, "I know." Simone looked up. Renee continued quietly, "I know you were jealous. I saw it. I did not want to name it because naming it meant dealing with it, and I had enough I was already dealing with. But I saw it." Simone said nothing. "I am not going to pretend this does not hurt," Renee said, "because it does. You sat at my table and were my friend while you were doing this. You stood beside me at my wedding and gave a speech that made people cry, and the whole time there was something else underneath it. That is going to take me a long time to sit with." Simone lowered her head. "But I need you to hear something." Renee leaned forward slightly. "And I need you to actually hear it, not just listen to it." She waited until Simone looked up. "You did not take a good life from me. You stepped into a fire. And I am sorry, not because you deserve my sympathy for the choices you made, but because you are a human being sitting in front of me in pain, and I am not built the kind of person who can look at that and feel nothing." The rain picked up again outside. "In some way I have not completely worked out yet." Renee continued, "What happened, you taking David letting me go, may have saved my life, because I do not know how much longer I would have stayed. I do not know what I would have become if I had stayed much longer." Simone exhaled slowly. "I forgive you," Renee said. The words were simple and unhurried. "But I need you to understand what that means and what it does not mean." Renee's voice was gentle but clear and steady. "It means I am not going to carry hatred for you. It means I am not going to spend my energy being bitter. It means I genuinely wish you safety and healing and a way through whatever you are in." She paused. "What it does not mean is that we go back to what we were. That friendship required a kind of trust that has been broken past the point of repair. I know what you are capable of when you want something badly enough. Cannot unknow that." Simone nodded once. Slowly. "So I am letting you go," Renee said. "With love. But I am letting you go." Simone stood. She stood in the middle of the small and modest and profoundly peaceful apartment, and she looked at Renee one final time with an expression that held everything she no longer had words for. "I understand," she said. She left. Renee sat alone for a while after the door closed. She finished her coffee. She listened to the rain. Then she went to her kitchen and started preparing for a holiday catering order she had in 3 days. She chopped and seasoned and stirred, and the apartment filled with the smell of good food being made with care, and outside the crepe myrtle trees on her street dripped with rain, and the November light shifted slowly through the window over her sink, and Renee moved through her small kitchen the way a woman moves when she knows exactly where she is and exactly who she is and is no longer afraid of either answer. Simone drove back to Buckhead through the November rain. She pulled into the driveway and sat in her car for a moment looking at the house. The wraparound front porch. The tall oaks in the front yard dropping the last of their leaves. The warm light visible through the living room window. From out here it still looked like everything. She went inside. David was in the living room with 2 business associates she did not know. Glasses of bourbon on the coffee table. The television on a football game. He glanced at her when she entered and said, without warmth and without introduction, "There is food in the kitchen. Make sure these gentlemen have what they need." Simone looked at him. She looked at the 2 men on the sofa who had glanced at her the way people glance at staff. She went to the kitchen. She moved through the kitchen she had once stood in and called beautiful, fixing plates and refreshing glasses, and she understood in the specific, clarifying way that only complete humiliation can produce that this was not what she had stolen. She had not stolen a life. She had not stolen happiness or peace or the particular grace of being genuinely chosen. Those things had never been in this house. She had stolen a role, and the role was not what she had imagined it was. Later that night, after the associates had gone and David had gone to bed without speaking to her, Simone stood at the kitchen sink washing glasses. The house was quiet. The back porch light was on outside, illuminating the empty patio furniture and the cold November garden. She looked at the string lights strung across the back porch ceiling. She had sat under those lights so many evenings during her visits, sipping sweet tea, watching Renee move through the house, telling herself that she would be more grateful, that she would appreciate it more, that if she had this life she would never complain. She understood now why Renee had never seemed grateful enough. You cannot perform gratitude for a life you are surviving. She dried the last glass and put it away. She turned off the kitchen light. She stood in the dark kitchen for a moment. Then she did something she had not done since she was a child. She prayed. Not a complicated prayer. Not a negotiation or a bargain. Just a plain and honest prayer in the dark of a kitchen that had never truly been hers, asking for the one thing she had chased across 2 states and into a cinder block house past Lithonia and into this beautiful trap of a life. She asked for peace. She did not know if anything heard her, but she felt something shift. Not her circumstances. Not the binding she had chosen in that dim room with the wind chimes and the cedar smoke. Just something internal. Something quiet and defiant and alive. The part of her that was still herself before the hunger had taken over. Before the wanting had become louder than everything else. That part was still there. And for the first time in a very long time, standing in the dark of a kitchen in a life she had stolen, she decided to tend to it. Across Atlanta, Renee woke up on a Saturday morning to early winter light coming through her apartment window. She made coffee. She wrapped herself in her grandmother's quilt. She sat by the window and watched the crepe myrtle trees on her street, bare now in November, their pale branches delicate against the gray sky. She had a catering order that afternoon, a birthday celebration for a woman turning 60 who wanted the food to taste like home. Renee had spent 2 days planning the menu. She was excited about it. She picked up her phone and opened a new note and started writing ideas. Her handwriting was her own again. Her thoughts were her own again. The morning was entirely hers. She was not living in a house in Buckhead. She was not wearing jewelry purchased as an apology for something no jewelry could repair. She was not walking on ice in her own home. She was safe. She was building something. She was herself. And if you had asked her, on that November Saturday with the winter light coming through her window and the coffee warm in both hands and the whole quiet day spread out before her like a road she had chosen herself, whether she would trade any of it for the life she had left behind. She would not even have needed to think. Some things look like everything from the outside, and some things that look like nothing. A one-bedroom apartment in Decatur, a cast iron skillet, a grandmother's quilt, a window with a view of bare crepe myrtle trees, are the most important things a person can possess. Because in the end, the most valuable address you will ever live at is not a neighborhood in Buckhead. It is the inside of a life where you are no longer afraid to breathe. And no one can give that to you. No one can take it. No charm in the world can manufacture it. It has to be built, quietly, carefully, from the inside out. Stay safe. Stay wise. Stay rooted in what is real. And remember, the peace you have, even when it looks like nothing to the people watching, may be the very thing someone else is quietly destroying themselves trying to find. This has been